Hey, folks, can you guys see the slide?
Yes, I can.
Not hearing anything. Let me check my audio.
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Penguin.
All right, try again.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
So can you guys see my slide?
Yes, we
Yes.
can.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Stop sharing for a second, just making sure it has the recording going. Since I don't know if we're going to have any Linux Foundation PM here today. All right. Morning, Ming. Good morning, Hannes.
Morning. Hey, Dave. Thanks.
So when we get to the roll call here, the introduction of new attendees, I'll have you briefly introduce yourself here after we do the quick roll call. Anybody else is new or here for the first or second time. Just give me a heads up. Looks like we are not close to quorum today, so we'll still wait a couple minutes. Start at maybe 5 after when it looks like we're approaching quorum here.
I know this is not my first meeting of the day. I think there's a couple other people probably that get dragged over in their previous meetings.
Mm-hmm. For those of us on West Coast US, it tends to be our first meeting, but for everybody else, maybe not so much.
It's my first one.
I dragged some people on the West Coast out of bed in the last hour, so you must have nicer colleagues.
I just got back from Palm Springs yesterday.
How was that?
What's that?
How was that?
It was at about the 90s Fahrenheit.
Wow.
But
Wow.
otherwise it was not. I was there at a conference, right? This is work, not vacation. This is the Linux Foundation was hosting the LSF MMBPF conference there that I was down at.
That was a lot of letters. Which one is that?
Linux storage, file systems, memory management, and BPF is the long expansion.
Thank you.
And yes, it's a long series of letters that looks like a huge long acronym. Yes. All right, looks like we're approaching quorum here. So we'll probably start at 5 after here in just a few seconds. All right, it's 5 after. Let's go ahead and get started. I don't think we're at quorum yet, but that's okay. Let's go ahead. All right. Welcome
You're gonna have to-
everybody. Yes,
I was gonna say, you have to fix the date on your slide.
this was not, so yeah, Kurt put these together, but thank you. Welcome to May 5th. All right, welcome to the Confidential Committee Consortium's Technical Advisory Council meeting. This meeting is an open to the public meeting where everyone is welcome, whether you are a voting member, a not voting member, or not a member. This is a collaborative experience. And if you're familiar with IETF, we try to have a very similar culture to IETF where we try to operate by consensus and everybody's contributions and points are equally valid. The only things that we really vote on is minutes and budget allocation. Otherwise, it's an open collaborative meeting, and even the votes are, of course, open. Not everybody can approve minutes and approve budget, but every project, this is around fostering open source projects, is probably our primary scope of the TAC, as well as communication that is on the technical side, and we have a bunch of stuff on the agenda today for that. So this meeting is, however, covered by the Linux Foundation's antitrust policy. If you haven't read it before, linuxfoundation.org/antitrust-policy. And with that, here is our agenda. And I wanted to ask if there's any agenda bashing, or is this order okay? If the order is okay, then I expect we'll do the TEEP talk from about quarter after until Q2, give or take. So we have at least a half an hour budgeted for that. We have a number of other things here, and then we'll get to the common terminology document at the end. And so any agenda bashes to this list here? Going once, going twice, okay. Then let us see how close we are to quorum as to whether we can vote on minutes or whether we defer the minutes until later. So let's see. I'm just going to scan down the list here. I see Dan and myself, which is only 2. Is there anybody else who's actually a voting member or alternate that's actually on the call today? I think I only see 2 out of 5 for approvers. Speak up if you think you're one. Otherwise, we have not the ability to vote on anything. We can still discuss things, but we just can't call for an official vote. So, so let's do an introduction of anybody that hasn't introduced themselves at least twice in a TAC meeting. And so let's see, Ming, why don't you go first, and then Hannes, and then anybody else that hasn't been here. I think everybody else, but go ahead.
Sure. Hi, this is Min. I'm from Broadcom, formerly Semantic and formerly VeriSign. So I've been working on the TEEP protocol, TEEP, I have the spec since the Semantic time. So actually, I'm quite some long time for this on history, several years. So my domain was mostly the authentication. Early days work with on the authentication, the key provision protocol, key prof. Then later it's on the TEEP. So that try to join today to this one. That's about it. Thank you.
Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Good. Go ahead, Hannes.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Hannes Trefenik. I work for ARM, and I work together with Dave and Ming and others in the IETF, and obviously in this specific case in the TEEP working group, about which we will report today.
Okay. Anybody else that has not introduced themselves twice? I think Mark, you've introduced yourself at least once. Have you introduced yourself twice?
I do not believe I have. Mark
Okay.
Novak. I work in applied research for a financial institution, and with focus on confidential things and also on ledgers.
Okay. Welcome. I'm back. Let's see, just noting that Howard has joined from Huawei, so that takes us to 3 out of 5. But if anybody else notes that another voting person joins later, just so we know whether we can vote on anything or not. But it could be that nothing will be ready for a vote. We'll see. All right, was there anybody else that has not introduced themselves at least twice in a TAC meeting? I recognize all the other names, so speak up if you have not introduced yourself twice. All right, then let's go on. Thank you all. The last time that I checked, both per request for minutes still had outstanding comments, although the first one only had one left from me that is trivial. And so I think on 4.7, sorry, let me just go to the conversation here. The 4.7 minutes, all I wanted was in the directory, we have the minutes in a markdown file and then a slides in files in the same directory, right, in GitHub here. And all I wanted is I wanted links from the slides in the main markdown. So you go to the markdown, it's easy, you just click on it or whatever. So that's all I did right here, is I added a little link to it. But otherwise, they looked good to me. And I see that Dan already approved and other TAC members have not. And so this one, if people agree with this, then I would also approve if we just merge that little one. So we'll just go to this. You can see all the changes that were recently done by Kurt. And I'm not going to do this on the other one. I'm just giving if you're new, this is what voting members do. You can see it's not that long. It has in this and so on. All right, any other comments in this minute since I can't call for a vote? And the other set of minutes, there's still a number of typos, there's clarifications, there's slide links and so on. So we can't call for a vote on this one either, because I think, so what's going on is I don't think we have any Linux Foundation PMs in the call here. Kurt isn't here, and that's because they're at an all hands this week. And so that's why any of the minutes from today will be done off of the recording. Hey, Kurt. So that's why they prepped some slides last week, and then I think Kurt, but could have been to help from others, and they won't be here during this meeting or to act on anything until after their all hands has been done. So that's the state of the minutes. Is I don't think I can call for it because we already have outstanding comments on there that have not yet been resolved. And so this is a call to say, hey, if anybody else that was at those meetings wants to comment on them, please do so before the vote is called. Otherwise, we will defer the vote until next week or until those things are merged. So not next week, next meeting, 2 weeks. All right, so with that, unless there's any other comments on past minutes, I think we're doing everything else after the TEEP discussion. And so with that, I think we can go ahead and go to the TEEP discussion. And so Hannes, I have the slides, that's the V4 copy that you sent this morning.
Yeah, we can do. Perfect.
Now, these slides were jointly done by myself and Hannes and Ming. So some history here. I'll let somebody else talk about the history there, but just in terms of the history of the personnel. When the IETF first started considering how do you provision things into a trusted execution environment, there was a proposal called the Open Trust Protocol that Hannes and Ming were both co-authors on, along with a couple of other folks. That document was originally proposed to both, I think, Global Platform and IETF. Global Platform looked at it and said initially, not interested. And so it came to IETF. IETF said, hey, we're interested in doing this. Working group got chartered that was called Trusted Execution Environment Provisioning. Then Global Platform turned around and says, oh, actually, we are interested in it. And so then they took the Open Trust Protocol as it was originally proposed, and then standardized it in Global Platform. And IETF wanted something that was more general than Global Platform, and hence the TEEP protocol is not called OTRP, Open Trust Protocol, it's called TEEP, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And so I was the original working group chair, and Hannes and Ming were the document editors of the original specification. And then maybe 2 years ago, I think I stepped down from co-chairing in order to become another co-author. So now we have all three of us are co-authors on things. And so with that, all of these slides here are going to be co-presented from us, kind of tag team, almost in like a panel type fashion. Sound good? Anything else you wanted to add, Hannes or Ming, before we get into the actual content?
No, I think that's a good intro. And yeah, as you said, like we would switch back and forth. And Dave, we've also decided unilaterally on where we will drag you in. So, okay, history. yeah, Dave mentioned a little bit of the dirty laundry already, like as it works in the standards business. Things are quite fluid. But going back even a little earlier to the days of the DE hardware, initially, like this is an old concept, as you guys are surely aware of. And there's actually some good write-ups about the history of DE, specifically mobile phones. I included a link here from some guys from Nokia who were involved in that work prior to the work that has happened in ARM and so on. But of course, as always, it takes a little bit of time to see widespread adoption or any adoption at all. Particularly hardware itself is typically not enough. You also need the software along with it, and then it needs to be usable so that the developer community picks it up. And so in the mobile phone space, situation is pretty good in terms of deployment of DEs. In other sectors, it's still early days. If you look at, let's say, IoT, for example. But there's progress, so things look pretty bright, and thanks to the work that you guys are doing with confidential computing, it will even look better in the future. Still, there are some problems or challenges, specifically when it comes to the distribution of software, which for running on those DEs, which we in our specifications refer to as trusted application. And those trusted
let me just break in for just a second here for the relationship to the white paper in progress. The terminology discussion is the TEAP protocol and the OTRP protocol before it were really designed for the secure library end of things, not necessarily the secure the confidential VM line of things, the confidential library end of things. But we'll actually talk about that more as we go on. But keep in mind the history here. When we say trusted application, it's really like the secure or the confidential library model, like the left end of the diagram that we'll get to in the terminology stuff. So, all right, please continue.
Yeah, there's a lot of terminology here as well. So in a nutshell, that was one of the challenges seen by the industry at that time, and I think it's still a challenge today. So as said, working group was created. The relationship to this open trust protocol was also explained by Dave earlier. Okay, next slide. One of the beauty of doing standardization work rather than just doing something vendor proprietary is that you have to work with others on not just the specification writing, but also defining what the use cases are, what the requirements are, and then write it to write the whole sort of conclusion down in a hopefully readable specification. That's what we have been doing for quite some time with different players in the industry. Obviously, working in the IETF, we had more people exposed to the work, and so we had suddenly somewhat different requirements than compared to what we started with. And so this is just a few selected requirements where specific parties, whether this is the admin of the device or DE, wants to have certain requirements fulfilled, for example, to manage a certain number of DAs, the trusted applications in a DE, or to have them run only on specific hardware. The author of the application may also want to have a say in the whole game, specifically when it comes to sort of data that is shipped alongside the trusted application code. For example, personalization data that makes the sort of the application instance unique, rather than having just a binary that is distributed to lots of different devices.
Yeah, each of these is like across the constituency of the entire IETF working group. These are potentially different use cases, right? That any particular, as far as who gets to decide what code runs inside of a TEE, right? And there's a bunch of different use cases, right? And in any particular device, chances are only one of these will apply, but across the whole ecosystem, each of these may apply in different places. And so the goal is to have a protocol that could be used by any of the above, because it's a common building block protocol that could be used for any of these different use cases, right? And so we try to have something that would meet the union of all these different use cases. Not that any particular device would have all these different use cases, but the protocol itself would support all these different use cases. So
yeah, that's a good point. So we obviously the requirements cover a pretty broad space of different deployment models and different needs, and so ultimately, and that's actually the next slide. I won't go through all of this in the benefit of time. The group came up with the idea to work on a protocol and use OTRP as a kind of a starting point. Of course, lots of things changed, and the IETF has worked on software update manifests and has worked on attestation, etc. In the meanwhile, and so and other security technologies, and so we were able to make use of them, and that's something stated on the next slide, Dave.
okay. Fine. Yeah, I can this one because I can talk about this one, I think.
Yeah, perfect.
So actually, there's other things out there in the industry that actually solve a very similar to problem to what the TEEP working group is chartered to solve, right? So I mentioned the global platform. Even before OTRP, global platform had another protocol, and I can't remember what the name of it is. Ming, do you remember what the name of the other one was that was the global platform before OTRP?
Yeah. What was it?
Actually, I forgot the small name. It's what is agent management protocol. It's trust management protocol, TMF something.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah. So since global platform deals with SIM chips and secure elements and things, and so they had, which has specific concepts and specific architecture, then it had protocols for dealing with that. Then there's things, sorry, I said SIM chips. There's a different, was it like GSMA, I think, has a protocol that does very similar for doing things in SIM chips, right? So between OTRP and the protocol Ming just mentioned for secure elements and the GSMA protocol for things like SIM chips, there's other things that do very similar things, but none of them are sort of more general. And so the IETF tried to tackle a more general problem, okay? But it means that in some cases where you have TEs, like secure elements, for example, you've already got a protocol that's designed specifically for that part of TEE, right? So in theory, you could use either of them, but there's already an ecosystem built up around tools and training and everything else in a particular industry. So, the GSMA industry, the secure element industry already have things, right? And so in practice, if you're doing things in that industry, like you're doing things with a secure element, you'll probably end up using a global platform protocol rather than TEEP, right? So we weren't not trying to design for that, but it was when it originally came into the IETF, we said, well, we want it to work for that. And then of course, global platform said, well, we're just going to do OTRP. So that means we actually have multiple different solutions in the industry today for doing different types of TEEs. And so we consider the TEEP protocol as being for kind of, everything else that's outside of GSMA and global platform. And so in terms of like your applicability graph, the TEEP protocol is designed for where you don't already have a protocol that is already widely deployed for a particular type of TEE that's a standard, right? Because both of those other ones, global platform and GSMA, are standards. And as we'll talk about, where you actually have some notion of a limited resource of storage that is inside the TEE. Okay, we'll get to, like, for example, it really doesn't apply to SGX because there's no storage inside the TEE, whereas things like in Trust Zone, where you have RPMB, the replay protected memory block, you have some notion that you can use as storage inside the TEE. Okay, and so I think we talk about this on a later slide. And so the point is that the TEEP protocol, you'll say, why aren't we using this for SGX right now? Well, it's because SGX doesn't have this need to install something into a TEE until we get to like confidential VM type stuff that I think we'll get to later. I think I still have a slide, otherwise I'll talk about it at the end. So, all right, anything else you guys want to talk about on this slide? So I was just talking about that top point here, right? Where that for a simple case that a TEE just loads and verifies a signed binary, whether it's an enclave, a container or whatever else, from an untrusted file system, right? If you just load it from an untrusted file system, you verify the signature, you verify that it's attested and it runs and so on. If you do that at load time, okay, then you don't need the TEAP protocol for distribution, right? Because you're distributing things onto the untrusted file system and then dealing with all the load time. TEAP is not needed in that case. TEAP is needed in the case where the install time or the deploy time is somehow need to be locked down by a trusted agent, not just by your untrusted file system or your untrusted OS. Does that make sense? Okay, so we're handling the case where you're trying to install stuff into a TEE. And stuff could be code, it could be data. Hannes used the term personalization data, it could be keys when you're trying to install things into a TEE in a cross-platform way, cross-DE vendor agnostic way. Okay, so that's what TEAP. Any questions on TEAP applicability? Because don't want people to say, well, I don't see any need for this in SGX. Yes, it's not designed for that right now. So, but as we'll see, once you get to cases like, Oclam and Grameen and things, then it starts to become relevant for some cases, probably. So. All right, who wants to talk to this one? I can, but Ming, you were involved.
Yeah, I can talk at this one. Yeah, I can talk
you
to
do this
the
one.
past. Yeah, I can talk at this one. So now we give now it's good to move to protocol. Talk about the relationship and into roles and what the user experience is for this protocol target toward this one. That we're mainly talking about here is an end user device and that the management service, and the main one is from application developer perspective. So we have a chip vendors, T vendors, T providers, and manufacturers are not dropped here because that will be talked later. They're more for the bootstrapping. But the main one is for app developer, right? Experience like application developer writes the applications, right? Which can have two parts. One part is a regular application, right? For the phone, one is a trusted component, a trusted application component. We use that word interchangeably. So okay, a little bit on that one. So the two pieces, how do I distribute that, right? Then they have two paths. For the normal app, it's standard today, right? They sign that normal app from the App Store issued key, right? Normally, right? They signed it, give the App Store like Apple Store or Google Play. There's places, and that's the first part. The second part is trusted app. Way to put it, I have two ways actually, two ways for that one. Trusted app, you can bundle the inside, embed inside the normal app, or usually with here it's a separate. It's the first one not common because for trusted application management, 2A or 2B, that mostly is used have assigned pieces and give it to the TAM provider. In this case, TAM provider help you to establish relationship with the device, So then what the experience for end user? End users, they have an app, they bought a purchase a device or give device from a corporate, right? So managed one. In all the cases, they download the app, right? First, they get normal app first. That you don't have a standalone app for the moment, right? You should get to download the normal app from the standard app store. Then that will trigger, right? That trigger normally trigger the normal app would trigger the trusted application part installation, right? And that whether it's embedded or it's a separate, right? Either embedded or separate. Let's say when it's embedded, it's locally, they still need to talk with trusted application manager, TAM in the bottom, to get authorization. It's a separate, it knows it's separate, it doesn't embed it, it has dependency to managers. Then to go to TAM, trusted app manager, called TAM, which will have this protocol. That's what we introduced, the TEAP, that is architecture and the protocol. It will download the trusted application code, trusted binary, signed, bunch of mutual trust verification, and get the app, and then install locally. That give the end users.
So this is one of the many different example scenarios, but it's hopefully one that people can relate to because people have phones with, secure chips and stuff on them. And so this is one of many different types of flows. And so TEAP protocol is basically line 4 in this particular experience. So Yogesh, you got your hand up. Please go ahead.
Yeah, one question in the prior slide I had was, does the TEAP provisions not only the keys or code, but does it includes configuration data as well?
Yes. Actually, it's a good point you raised, and I will do talk that one later. Actually, so yes.
Okay.
We can put on those data. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And the second question is, when you say the item 4 on this slide,
uh,
the installer communicates to TAM. So how do the two trust each other? Because TAM
that's
needs to
have
check.
more slides. Yeah, we're talking about more slides. Trust
Well,
anchor,
yeah,
they were
yeah.
taught. Yes, good
Wait for
question.
that. Yeah, we'll get to
Yeah, you
that.
set up the additional slide to talk. Good. Yeah.
Good question. Hold that thought.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to keep
Purpose,
going
I
here.
would say job of TAM
Yeah.
TAM is really to establish the trust. So then we have that. Yeah.
Yeah, the TAM is really the entity that is authoritative for what is allowed to run inside the TEE. Okay, or in some cases there may be multiple TEEs in there, or multiple pieces of a TEE with different authorities, and so this is the authority for one of the things that we call a TEE, or in global platform you might call it a security domain, and so on. So the definition of what's the scope of T and how many of them is there is a little bit flexible from the T perspective. So. Let's see. This is another old slide because it uses an old term here. So maybe you want to talk about this one.
Yeah.
Anything you want to add on this one?
Yeah, I talked this one in the past too. I think the next one to trust anchor, then I can pass to the Hannes. So just just a split chat here. So this one's it's kind of an old diagram we have. I think, but it's still correct. I would say correct. It just means terminology may have a little bit of difference. We changed TA. Well, I still use that one. So now you see this now the device component. We talk about roles. Now in this flow, you may want to look at the tab, right? Look at the tab from right side. It's the developers, right? Developers are supplying, right? Developers need to distribute, right? I'm a developer. And that may be from manufacturer, maybe from device vendor, right? The system TA, then you have mostly the consumer commercial TAs, let's say the one, right? You have the trusted the 2B in the last diagram, right? They need to give that one, right, to the device. Eventually, they want to give how to give it. So yeah, developers really say we need the demand or requirement link back or requirements. Talk about it in the second slide. They were saying now. They need somewhere to reach the device and they give it to TAM, right? The TAM. In this case, then they naturally say they have a life cycle of trusted application, right? When they need to update it and how that application, how the device trust that developer, right? That's just a question that I asked just a second ago, right? Exactly. I was walk from right to left. So now how to device trust that application itself, right? We call trust component signed, right? Who signed? How to trust the signer? Whether it's immune from the vulnerability threats, like in case it happens, right? How to update it. So that's the problem. Also need is a protocol need to address. And from time aspects, and I'm doing the job on behalf of a developer, right? In this case, developer is a concept. It's not only end user, right? I just talk about it's just general. I mean, who is author of the TA, right? Also TA. It's maybe organization. So they're really doing that management job. So they talk with device owners and talk with dealing with the manufacturers or for manufacturers or coming here actually. So they have the application, how to give the update to the billions of end users. So TAM's job is to do that one. So when distributed at a large scale, it's mainly software, how to make that update, right? There's an update part, there's an initial installation part and there's an update part. Right, so that the manufacturer has that requirement, that design, they need to say how to trust that over-the-air update, right? How to do that. Otherwise, it's 2 lines the same. Okay. Yeah. So then for device owners, I'm a device owner. Device owner means you have 2. As you may be end user, you may be actually the corporate. It's really automatic. So who owns that device? Which is sometimes a device owner, device admin. Okay, just say the case. Then what applications are allowed to run in my device, how much control I have, right? And what kind of a developer trust? Do we trust developer or don't trust human individually? We know it's all by signer, right? Kind of a trust we need to build to solve that was. Then the T providers, they are really, the T's are bootstrapping devices, right? What do they come with default? What kind of information, I go say, like a key to reprint this device, right? So that it can be verified by the remote TAM. And then also how to bootstrapping, right? What did you put in there? So it can be identified and it can be trust anchor and way to put that one. so that it cannot be modifying IE side. All this sit in the secure word side. But for T particularly, it's sitting in secure word side. Information there, you need it embedded there.
So
I think that's about it. So there's a more, I think, in more elaboration in next slide, few slides.
Yeah, so let's actually get into what it does, and how it does it, unless there's any other questions on what problem we're trying to solve. All this so far we talked about is what problem is the working group been trying to solve, and some of it will become more obvious we think, once you see what it actually does. So I think this one is my slides. This is showing actual roles here, the Trusted Application Manager, and a device that has a TEE in it, right? And so there's some transport, which we'll get to talking about. There's API calls for things that are in there, and the TEEP protocol runs end-to-end between the TAM and a TEEP agent inside the TEE. Okay, so there's actually two layers we'll talk about. There's the TEEP session that goes end-to-end, and then what's the actual transport protocol, there's a separate document for. And so we'll talk about the green line and we'll talk about the red line. Okay, so trust anchors. Do you want me to talk about this one or somebody else? I'm happy to talk about this one and the next slide here. I think this is what both Hannes and Ming were alluding to. So
yeah, but you can talk as well.
Okay, all right. When we say trust anchor, it's the what goes in your local store that is your set of things that you will trust, right? So in other words, are you trusting things that do you have a set of public keys configured that are the things that you trust for the identities that you trust? Is it a certificate or whatever? And so we just call it a trust anchor. It could be either of those. And so you store a set of trust anchors that anything that has, say, the corresponding, private key that signs stuff, then you match it against your trust anchor store to say, is this something that is in your trust list? So, so here's the set of keys, right? And so there are what the purpose is and who has which keys for whom. Okay, so we're going to just walk through this one here. So for authenticating a TEEP agent, okay, the TAM has a set of trust anchors that says, here's the keys for TEEP agents that it will trust. Okay, there's one per TE. So for example, this might be the key that is baked into the hardware or dynamically generated, like in a dice sense in the hardware, and that's what the TAM has. Typically, this will chain up to the manufacturer, right? So this might be a certificate. If it chains up to the manufacturer, it could be a raw public key if there's a very small number and the TAM has a complete set. And so this is what's used to sign messages, right? So that's signed with this key, or at least with the private key at least derives from this key, right? If it's not the same thing, right? So this is the TAM has a trust store that is used for authenticating TEEP agents that typically chain up to the manufacturer. Second one is, how does the TEEP agent trust the TAM? Okay, well, the TEEP agent has a key for each TAM, often just one, right? But it could have multiple keys that it trusts for TAM for what is authoritative for what can run inside the TEE, right? The TEEP agent is like the on-device in TEE agent that controls what code or data, configuration data, keys, whatever is installed into the TEEP, into the TEE. And this is what signs the messages in the other direction, right? The TEEP requests, sorry, terminology here. Request is the term for things that come from the TAM to the device, and responses are the ones in their direction. The labels there are somewhat arbitrary, but the TEEP protocol was constructed as a request response, where it's typically one-to-one, but you can just think of that as a directional statement. And then lastly, code signing, which is once you install a binary, whether that binary is a configuration file, whether it's a code or whatever, each of those files has to be signed, and that's separate from the channel signing, right? Which is the first two lines here, right? This is the data signing. So here there's one per entity that signs binaries. And this is also stored in the TEE, not in the TEEP agent, because this is something that might be enforced at boot time or load time, okay? And so the TEE itself is doing this, saying, okay, which signers do you actually accept to be loaded as opposed to be installed? And so there's kind of both steps that go together. So there's both data signing and message signing. Okay, Yogesh, did that answer your question or any follow-ups on that one? Because this was the slide that we said to hold for.
Yeah, I think thanks.
Okay, great.
I think pretty much covers that. Yeah.
Okay.
You actually repeat that last bit again about different policies for loading the binaries versus the messages.
Sure. The TEAP protocol is it is active at deployment time, right? I'm going to take, say, an SGX enclave, or I'm going to take a confidential container image, and I'm going to install that inside of a TE as opposed to just on the untrusted file system, right? So the TEAP protocol is only involved at deployment time, okay? Now, at some later point, that will actually be loaded, right? So for example, after a reboot, the TEAP protocol won't run on reboot, right? But the TEE will then be loading things, right? And so the code signing stuff takes effect at load time. The TEAP's keys are used at install time or deploy time.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so now we talk about attestation, and I know a bunch of you have been in the attestation working groups, and so this is one of the differences between the OTRP protocol in Global Platform and IETF, because IETF, we have the RATS working group that we've had conversations about in presentations here. And so when IETF was doing the TEAP protocol, it said, well, we don't want to reinvent stuff or compete with other working groups. We just want to use whatever comes out of RATS for attestation. And we want to use whatever comes out of SUIT for the install steps, right? So the SUIT working group is the software update for IoT working group, although it's a misnomer because it's basically a binary update format as a manifest. It's not a protocol. It's the format for saying, how do I have a manifest and the sequence of install steps, okay? And so for installing stuff, the TEAP protocol is the conveyance, right? The RATS takes care of the attestation part, and then the SUIT format is used for, I'm going to install stuff. What is it that I'm installing? How do I package up? Are those code? Are they data files? What's the sequence of install instructions on a particular thing? All that's encapsulated in a SUIT manifest, okay, and just referenced as payload by the TEAP protocol. So the relationship to attestation is over here. You have the device. This is where the TEAP agent runs. You have the TAM, which is the authoritative source of what runs in there. And this is showing one example. That's the example that OTRP and the initial TEAP was first designed for, but not limited to, where evidence is shown here. So you can see here, this is the background check model. Could you use it in the passport model? Yes, you could, but it's less natural, and I'll explain why. And so what's going on here is one of the primary cases for TEAP is when you are out of compliance, right? So attestation fails. It says you are not up to date with the latest policy, okay? This means you got to go through some remediation, okay? It says, how do you get back into compliance? How do you recover something that is now out of compliance? And even if you haven't been compromised, it could be that now the correct state has moved on and you're one stage out of date, right? And so the TEAP protocol is designed as a remediation protocol, right? And so how do you do remediation? Well, the easiest way to do mediation is to say the attestation result is a failure result or an out of compliance result or a partial success result, depending on whether you're using, what the AR4SI or something else, right? There's different variations of that. But the point is the results of attestation needs to come to the TAM, okay? Now, again, the attestation results can come to the TAM via either passport or background check models. This is showing the typical example where evidence is simply an opaque pass-through that the TAM doesn't know anything about. It's just a blob, passes it on to a back-end verifier. The verifier has attestation results here, but the attestation results here have to have enough knowledge about what's installed on here. So some things that come in the TEAP protocol outside of evidence, and other things come inside the attestation result that the verifier says, here's what the policy is. The TAM is the thing that actually is responsible for kicking off the remediation, saying, you're out of compliance because, say, if you're running Trust Zone, right, your opti, right, your secure kernel is out of date, and so I need to push down an update to that. Or your trusted application has patches it needs to be installed, so he has to kick that off, right? So that's what happens here is whenever the device wants to attest because he wants to do some other action, then he would go off to the verifier and come back and could present that here. And so the TAM then kicks off remediation, just to make that clear. I just wanted to drill that down, that TAM is what's responsible for kicking off mediation. It's not the only case for using TEAP. You may do it periodically or something else, but or as Ming was mentioning, when you're trying to install a new application here, is that authorized? But the relationship to attestation is specifically because we want to use TEAP to do the remediation step.
And there are also different keys. Referring back to the earlier slide where you showed the keys, obviously for attestation, there are different keys again, which is,
So in order to do remediation, the TAM needs enough information to know what to remediate. And so this then introduces some requirements around what appears in the attestation results. And so as I mentioned, that in the TEAP protocol, it recommends using the RATS output, but it's not limited to that, because you can specify an alternate format in there with a media type and use something custom, and that's acceptable. That it's not limited to use by that, but it does say when using EAT, then here's the little ID that you put into the format field. But it's designed to be agnostic to the format of evidence and attestation results. So it really doesn't care whether you're using background check or passport. It doesn't care whether you're using EAT or not, although it says when you're using EAT, here's what you do. Otherwise, you're on your own for specifying your own profile. And the verifier may or may not be co-located with a TAM, right? So those could be combined into the same entity, or there could be, a backend verifier like a Verizon or Azure attestation service is your verifier, and some other service is the TAM. All right, I think I've pretty much talked about all those. I'm going to keep going. So the IETF TEAP documents do talk about here's the set of information that needs to appear in claims in each if you're using each, such that that they would be present in the attestation results for the remediation to be able to use, right? So if the verifier just says, yes, you're good, and just gives you a yes or a no, that's not sufficient, because you can't do remediation with a no. You got to say why no, right? And so that's what, there's more details in the specifications. Let's see.
I think
Hannes?
you should skip this one and go
Okay.
to the one afterwards. I think that's more interesting to this group.
Fair. Yeah, so I mentioned the green line and the red line about the transport and the end-to-end one. So this one is saying this is the top level layer. The TEAP one goes from the TEAP agent to a TAM. The most popular transport is HTTP, and there's currently one transport document. They're in two different documents because the expectation is there can be multiple transport documents over time. The first document is where the TEAP agent is an HTTP client and the TAM is an HTTP server, right? If you think about that phone scenario, if there's a firewall there, right, then the direction has to be outbound through the firewall. And so whatever is on the inside of the firewall has to connect outbound. And so for the case where, say, it's a phone or an edge device, an IoT device or something like that, this transport would be appropriate. There's other cases where the opposite direction would be appropriate, say where your TEE is in a data center and your TAM is, say, in an on-premise server. And that's a scenario that NARCS was interested in, is having the transport be in the opposite direction, because that is the NARCS scenario where the TEAP agent here would be in the NARCS keep in, say, a cloud data center, and the TAM might be an on-premise server for a particular tenant's on-premise, controlling everything that runs in that tenant's portion of the cloud. And so NARCS presented the use case for having the opposite direction as a transport underneath the TEAP protocol. The IETF hasn't done that part yet, but there's obviously interest in it, and that same thing may apply not just to NARCS, but that same thing may apply to, I don't know, Oclam, Grameen, whatever else. So if there's interest in that, then the IETF would absolutely do one in the opposite direction. It's not that hard because a lot of the same spec here would still apply. The mapping between what is actually in the REE and the TE, that little API line I showed on one of the first diagrams there. Exactly where this middle layer is implemented. Is this middle layer of TEAP over HTTP, is that implemented in the TE or outside the TE? And the answer is the spec is written such that it could be either one. That's what this one is showing with different models here, right? Do you actually have an HTTP implementation and a TLS implementation, sorry, HTTPS implementation inside your TE, or is that outside? And the answer is because we have end-to-end with TEAP, it doesn't matter, right? All those are possible. You could move the entire TCP/IP stack inside the TE, and you'd still use the TEAP protocol, right? You could leave all that outside and have only the TEAP protocol be inside there. The architecture doesn't care. That's why there's different layers with different keys. So the keys that you're using with HTTPS, for example, is not the keys we were talking about on the previous slide with those three rows, right? If you're using HTTPS, then that's something that is a separate key in addition to those. And that's for cases where you have your HTTPS implementation that's completely your normal one that's in your normal world, not secure in a confidential computing sense. Okay. They're saying that it's agnostic.
Yogesh has a question, Dave.
Yeah, please go ahead.
This makes a lot of sense when your TEEP agent is utilized to update a particular TEE, say software update.
Yep.
When in factory, would you follow the same protocol, or because you could have when you are shipping millions of devices for the very first time, you may have a much simpler protocol than this, right?
Yeah. I don't know if one of you guys has a comment, but I would say, yes, you could use it in a factory, but if it's in a secure facility, you might use a much simpler mechanism.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
I'm going to go over, I'm not going to spend details on this one, but this is just showing you how the requests work. There's the end-to-end requests, which are the red lines inside here. And then there's the transport lines, which are currently the blue ones on here. So you can see the actual, content type and accepts and so on. And remember, this is the API calls. The vertical lines here was the different layers in the previous slide here. Right? So whether the HTTPS is inside or outside the TEE doesn't matter, because there's data security message security on the query request for a response. Okay. The next two are probably interesting though. So this is an example of in the scenario Ming showed, where what triggers the install is not, say, the TAM. Like if you were doing a data center installing a bunch of workloads inside a confidential computing cloud, then that's not the connection model we're showing here. This is showing the model where there might be user initiated, where the user goes to a device and says, I need to do something. And doing something requires there to be a trusted application, a confidential application, confidential library, confidential container, whatever installs. This is triggered from the device, is this model here. Both are interesting in the TEEP case. It's just the install is much more complicated in the case where you have another entity like a human involved. So it's showing the more complicated case. So the human says, oh, I want to install, say, my banking application. Okay. And the banking applications manifest says, oh, I depend on there being something in the TEE that can, sign stuff, sign payment authorization for tap to pay, right? And so one model is where the broker ships with the application such that you don't need any support in the OS or anything else to depend on, right? So it just all ships together. And so it goes off to the TAM. The TAM has to say, hey, I got a message for the TEEP. Do you already have stuff installed or not? And so it just has to forward stuff into the TEEP agent. TEEP agent says, yes, I'm a SGX, or I'm a, AMD, or I'm a, Trust Zone, or whatever it is. And I have a claim that somebody needs TAX. And so then the TAM can then act on information to say, hey, is TAX actually authorized for install on this particular device in this particular TE, and so on. Okay. Second model is where there's a TEEP agent, so in this first case, right, the TEEP protocol has to be implemented in something that ships with the application. And that's for cases where, like the rich execution environment, the OS doesn't have something. There's another case where there might be a general installer, like for installing an app store. Whereas back here, this was the new rich application kicks it off, right? And this one, the app store installer is enlightened to say, the App Store installer knows something about this. So your Play Store or your App Store or whatever application or OS support says, I depend on something here. So I say I'm a foo, I need TAX, and so I don't even install the rich application unless I know that the part that depends on can be installed, right? And so this might be for applications that have a hard dependency that says it's not useful for me to do anything without there being a TA, as opposed to things where the trusted part might be optional and I have some functionality that I can do. So the point is, both of these are different ways that OSs and applications that run on user machines can actually kick things off and relate. And both of these models are applicable to different scenarios, right? And it's probably easier to imagine what's the case when there's no user involved and it's just a TAM pushing stuff into, say, a cloud confidential computing cloud. So that's why I don't have a diagram on that, because that's fairly straightforward. So more like the previous slides.
It just add a comment. It just add that clarification that the where the time is, right? Say in this application, in both cases, that metadata, including the where the times URL, this information in the manifest file, right? No matter how the broker is installed. So it's just a really good reading kind of this setup. So that's a good point, because this is about installing applications, but there's also things about, the TAM wants to keep the TEE up to date with the latest
firmware, the latest, secure kernel, whatever it is that goes inside the TE that may not be the application, right? If you look at Eric's diagrams, we'll see later, there's other parts that are below that are still part of the TEE OS or the TEE, but aren't necessarily the application per se. And the TAM can still update those. And so that includes both code and data. And so how would you update? How would you do key update, right? These things over here, right? These things, there's code, there's things signed in. How do you update, say, the keys, the trust anchor store for the TEEP agent? Answer, you use TEEP. You can push out new keys because it's another blob there. It's not a code binary, it's a key set, right? And so you can still use the TEEP ones, whether it's a data file, whether it's a set of keys, whether it's code, and that gets to how the suit manifest works, or what are the steps for doing installation. Here's the binary, and then here's the installation step. And TEEP is just the conveyance for passing the suit manifest to carry those blobs. All right, so that's the list of specifications, because the slides will be available just so everybody has the links. Hannes, what did you want to say about this one? Back to you.
Yeah, I just thought it would be useful for the audience to also have a little bit of code to play around with. And I picked 3 implementations that I thought are quite good. And yeah, it's
okay. All right, so we're at the question slide.
Yeah.
So this takes us to the end here. And so Penguin, you got your hand up. So that was the last slide. So
Yeah, hi, hello. Yeah, I have a question about the full CDDL of the TEEP protocol. Yeah, I think that the TEEP architecture, this document has a full CDDL example, and when I try to run it in the CDDL diagnose tool, which is recommended by the CDDL RFC, and I cannot pass the example. I'm not sure it's my own fault or there is something changed that has not been informed by us. I'm not sure.
There's a pull request. I suspect it's the same thing that the pull request currently fixes that's open right now. It should be merged shortly. And there's, let's see, the links right here. Yeah, do we have links to the specs? Let's see. These are the published ones. There's the editor's copy that's in GitHub. And I don't think we have the link to that in there. I wonder, can we post that in the chat? Yeah, thank you.
Oh.
So yeah, thank you. If you click on the link that Hannes says and you go to the editor's copy, it's either fixed in there or there's a pull request that fixes it.
Okay, I can screenshot the problem and discuss with you. Okay.
Yeah, thanks. That's quite. And you can also just put it into one of the issues. I posted a second link, so if anyone has any comments on the specifications, you just include them.
Yeah, okay.
And there was right 2. And then I realized that we didn't have that slide talk about the impersonalization part. The question earlier.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So I'm the first one to implement it.
Okay. We got at least another 2 minutes here, so I do want to make sure your guest gets to ask this question too. So, but if you want to say something about personalization, go ahead and keep it short. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick sense. So first one, the protocol has end-to-end encryption. Then when the data sent from TAM back to the TEEP device, payload is always encrypted. Use the key negotiated, right? At the device key. So that one, first part, it says a secure channel. Second part, more for personalization configuration data. They will be from a manufacturer or from enterprise, somewhere vendor, right? They will give the TAM. So instead of give TAM, which you may not trust to give those ones, we say you're allowed to use a separate TAM. That TAM job is to you host, manufacture, you host the TAM yourself, manufacture enterprise, right? You host the TAM itself that will deliver the data as if a trusted component to the device.
And by personalization data, if that term is new to anybody, we just mean anything which data varies, that is very specific to a single device, right? So if you'd send the same thing to all the different devices that you're managing, it's not personalization data. If you'd send a different instance to all the devices, it's called personalization data in fact.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's a differentiation. It's because now say someone manage that different data for different devices, individual user, social as well. So that's where there's an additional dependency there that the time does not have, right? But now in this case, there's a instead path to a time they may not trust, so they use host time. So use same protocol. We try to say same protocol used to manage also that personal data, personalization data.
All right, go ahead, Yogesh.
You recommend suit manifest, or is it and the TP is only supposed to work with suit manifest for updating? Is the
What do you guys
question
want to
clear?
take that? I think currently the protocol is specified to be suit manifest only, but Hannes or Ming, it's
That I might.
Yeah, it does. It's only
I
the
think we
users-
will do what you want. Yeah, one standard one.
if you have a need for that to be agile like it is for evidence and things, then yeah, I'm sure the working group would love to hear that. I'd say that would not necessarily be out of the question. It's just so far we've not heard any requests for that. Where for things like evidence, because it has to work with any type of PEE, right? Then what is the format that you're using for attestation results? And so there's some discussion in RATS, but of course there could be alternate formats that are already in use today. If you're already using, say, Intel's SGX service, and you wanted to use it with, say, NARCs or Grameen or Oclam or something like that to use the TEAP protocol, we'd still want that to be used. But for manifests, if you have requirements, please send them. These things are close to becoming an RFC, but we can always add extensions, right? Just like we have the one transport here, we can have other transports and things. So that's possible. So, and the protocol itself already has extensibility mechanism built in. To say, here's how we would add new code points and things. And so it envisions there being possible things we would need in the future. So,
okay, thanks. And you mentioned one of the cases where the application is triggering the update of TAM through the agent. Is there because the TAM may want to update the TEE software directly, right? May not necessarily come from the application. So maybe I missed that part. There is already might have been a slide where.
Yeah, no, it was in the backup. Okay. So because of cases where the TEAP agent may be behind a firewall, and so connections may have to be initiated outbound, okay, then because if it's in the other direction, that's easy, right? Because the TAM can just could just reach out and poke it or whatever. But here, if the TEAP agent has to, then it says, okay, it's triggered when a TA is needed. That's when you were just talking about. But there's also can be run at an interval. And so periodically the TEAP agent would reach out, once a day or once or whatever to say, hey, anything for me, right? And the TAM can always push out, I want to change your interval. There's another configuration change. Please start asking me every day or every week or something like that. And so this notion here, it has to do with the policy updates. And so in the interest of time, I skipped it, but since you asked, here's the answer. So.
Thank you. I think we run out of time, so I won't take Thank you.
Okay. So because there's some relationship between this and the terminology discussion, Ming and Hannes, if you can stick around for another hour, I'm sure you'll get value out of the discussion that Eric Voigt and Steve Van Leer have been leading, and so your input on the terminology document would be great if you're available during the next hour or so.
Okay, sure. Okay, yeah, I will stay.
All right, but yeah, we're a little bit behind, although we are perhaps light on some other things. So I'm hoping we'll actually be okay. So let me get back to my browser here. All right. All right, so let's see if I think everybody on the action item review is not on the call. And so I think unless anybody knows something here, I'm going to skip this because all of those people are not here right now.
Actually, do you interact with Stephen at all?
Sometimes.
If you could just relay his action item.
I will, yeah.
Thank you.
I don't think there's any updates to that one. All right, so let's get on to the interns discussion. I should say Dan/Nick. Now that both of you are here on the call at the same time, which one of you would like to summarize this now that we can actually have the discussion?
I can set up the question because it's basically a question in it.
Go ahead.
We had a number of interns or intern candidates show up on Slack looking for guidance. So just wanted to make sure that everybody on the TAC had the right guidance to give. So Nick, if you could just bring us back up to speed on what internship programs are in progress right now and which projects might be taking advantage of those.
Yes, so Dan, thank you for bringing this up. I think this was both positive and negative, hopefully more positive than negative. The positive side is that we saw a lot of people interested in learning more about computational computing. Perhaps the negative side is that hopefully it did not interrupt too much other people's work on the general Slack channel. But I think it was overall a good experience. Veracruz is participating as well on Outreach together with the Anarchs projects. Those are the two projects that are part of Outreach right now in this term. And we got a lot of good candidates. I've been speaking with the folks from Veracruz, and they, in fact, today there was a release of Veracruz, and I believe they got some contributions already from Outreach applicants who created a PR, or in other words, I think it has been good for Veracruz, and it has been very good for Anarchs as well. And so I want to thank everyone who has received those interns, and especially you, Dan. I know you've been directing people to the right place, so thank you for that as well.
Yeah, and as far as being able to direct people, I guess this batch of intern candidates has already been sorted, or do we expect more people that might be landing looking for direction?
Yes, this is a very good question. So yesterday was the deadline for us to select an intern. So I know that the Veracruz project, they found, I believe, 4 good candidates, and 2 of them they really wanted to take those 2. Anarchs, we found really good candidates as well, and I've selected 1. And in the coming weeks, this decision will be published in the Outreach websites, and we'll be able to announce who are the new interns for each one of those projects. And hopefully other projects will be interested in getting an intern in the next term as well.
Great. And then how long do these internships last for?
Yes, so they will start in early June, I believe, and they last for 3 months. And so from the last term, we had interns graduating from Outreach, and we also, the Anarchs projects, we also got 2 interns from LFX mentorship. This is something that Profium is paying for. It's not. So the TAC has agreed to pay for the internship from Outreach, 1 for each project, and Profium also decided to pay LFX mentorship for 2 of those. And it's very similar. And LFX mentorship is run by the Linux Foundation, so I really recommend them as well.
Okay, great. So we, I guess the 3 or so interns that would be getting underway, they already know where they're going. So we wouldn't anticipate needing to direct anybody in the community. And then maybe 3 or 4 months out, we'll be looking at projects, maybe having another round of interns coming in.
Perfect. Yeah, I really want to thank and appreciate Veracruz for joining us. And I believe we have a lot of in common with Anarchs, because they both, of course, use confidential computing, but also WebAssembly. And I believe it has been very valuable for them. And hopefully the next term, other projects will see this and join us as well. It does require some work because we have to mentor those people. But the return is really good, not just for us, but for the community as a whole. And just giving one example. So we had those interns from the Anarchs projects. publishing articles about confidential computing and a community that we're working on, which is Web Builders, which is WebAssembly Builders. And it has been gathering a lot of interest from people about confidential computing. So this is beneficial for everyone, and I highly recommend that.
Great. And then just feedback for the next round. I don't know if there's a way to communicate within the internship recs or elsewhere which project they are applying to, because that'll also help us when they show up looking for direction. We can know which project
Yes.
they're bound for.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So for each one of those applications that we had, in the case of Veracruz, they oriented those applicants to actually go to the Slack channel of CCC. So that might be the confusion. So in the next round, I will recommend for us to be more specific and say, hey, you have to access, just like anarchs, we said, you have to access chat.anarchs.dev. Maybe for Veracruz can be more specific in that regard, so people will be better oriented. But hopefully it was not too disruptive of the CCC. And my apologies if that was the case.
No,
well.
it wasn't disruptive. I just want to be able to point people to the right place, and the applications that they would link us to just said CCC, or they just thought they were applying to the CCC.
Yeah.
So it wasn't initially clear.
Confusion around that. Yeah.
So yeah, but I think overall, it was good. It was good to see the engagement there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dan, and thank you for the questions as well.
And Nick, anything else you want to say about the blog post?
Yes, so it will be part of the newsletter. We're collecting updates from each project, and we'll be publishing the newsletter, I believe, in the next week or the other one.
It's in the outreach newsletter?
No, actually, yes, from the outreach newsletter, correct.
Yeah, because we're talking about a CCC blog post as opposed to something on an outreachy site or an NARC site or a Veracruz site. Yeah.
Yes, perfect.
Yeah,
that's correct.
Okay. All right. Any other questions for Nick or Dan? Okay. Great. I'll move on.
Okay. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Dave.
Next short topic. Common test infrastructure, right? You may remember from previous meetings that we had the line here labeled common test infrastructure. We'd added this one with a vote that we picked a number out of the air, which was 15K, and so far we have not used it for anything. And so reaching out to projects, I've reached out to one of them as the mentor, which is Open Enclave, because they have not had any budget requests for like project test infrastructure themselves. And of course they are consuming things. And so I'd have the same question for other projects, right? As we've had annual reviews, is there any other testing things, right? If you remember, the guidance from the board to the TAC is you've got budget, spend more money. Because we kept having budget that went unspent. So find ways that would actually benefit projects and spend money on them. And so we had this common test infrastructure thing that is currently not used, and so that's why I wanted a brief discussion about here. When I followed up with, say, the Open Enclave team, they said, well, to paraphrase, right, common test infrastructure, and for those of you that are new to this, what we mean by that is example. GitHub has the ability to have, say, self-hosted runners. And so if you wanted to have GitHub CI/CD tests that would actually run using actual TE hardware, right? Whether it's actually running on, SGX, or actually running on, whatever other hardware of your choice is, right? So how do you do that right now? And so you can do that on a per project basis, but this line item was to say, hey, could we have something like, for example, GitHub self-hosted runners that run on TEs that multiple projects can use the same runner because multiple of them use SGX, to just take an example, right? So that multiple projects could share that cost because they're not utilizing 100% of the cycles in CI/CD on that device, Is that something that could be shared? So that's what this line item was originally envisioning. And when I asked Open Enclave, they said, well, actually, the bigger cost is not for the hardware per se, it's for the person to actually maintain that particular piece of hardware. And so they said, well, it's actually not the upfront cost. It's gee, if we could get, say, an LF person to be the owner and maintainer of that self-hosted runner, then it would start to become an interesting thing, right? But you could spend up to $7,500 just like on a project basis of getting that, but who's going to maintain it? So that's the real question here, right? So I asked Brian Warner, and who's the Linux Foundation, our PM before Kurt, and Stephen Wally, who's our board chair. And Brian said, well, we'd have to like hire somebody to do that, and finding somebody to hiring them is like in the 50 to 200K range. But it seems like this shouldn't be specific to the CCC, and we'd have a very minority part of that person's time. And so I'm just curious if other people have thoughts out here on how to move forward, and especially if there's any other thoughts from any other projects that might make use of this in their demands, because we've got budget here. We're trying to find a way to actually make it become feasible and that people would actually use it and be cost effective. So any thoughts on this topic?
I think it'd be interesting to try to get some of the maintainers engaged here, because I would imagine like Grant Main and Oakland would have similar test infrastructure requirements.
Yeah,
maybe some of the other projects too. So I think either we need the mentors to, like you did, reach out to your project, but either getting the mentors more engaged or getting the maintainers directly pinged.
Yeah, I think that's a good initial step. So let's put that on. Note to Kurt, who should be listening to this, if you can put that down as an action item for the mentors of their projects, which are back on slide 9, the list of mentors. If the only way to get common infrastructure is to have some portion of an LFPM's time, which I'm hoping would not be 100%, it should be some small fraction. But if we had to go above 15K in order to meet salary, so it's not for equipment, but it's also covering, point something of a LF person's time. Are there any concerns or support for raising the 15K number to some higher number? Because otherwise, my fear is that 15K will be $0 used at the end of year. And we kind of picked it out of the air. It was a guess. And it turns out what it's looking like to me from one data point so far that guess is not going to be useful. Anyone else have thoughts? Otherwise, we'll put an action item on the mentors, and we'll come back to this after we get feedback from more projects to see if they say the same thing.
Dave, may I add a comment here?
Yeah, please. Anyway.
So the Annex project, we have benefited from a computer that we bought, but I do sympathize with the commentary that sometimes you have to have somebody who is going to manage that infrastructure, and this is exactly the case for us. So we actually hire somebody to manage this, and we're also thinking in getting an intern to help us further. I don't know what's the solution here. But maybe,
I've been in 2 other foundations that have, well, 1.5 depending on your count, because one was then merged into the other one, both of whom had an LFPM managing Jenkins infrastructure.
Yes. So just comments around what we did with Anarch projects. We're hiring one intern through LFX mentorship to help us with GitHub Actions and CI/CD. So this is one solution, because I imagine many of those projects, they don't have the bandwidth to handle all of this. Right. And maybe getting someone through LFX mentorship might be a solution for that.
So it sounds like you're supportive. And if there was a common one, do you think NARCs would use it? Because I know you guys do SGX and at least one other one, but if there was, say, actual SGX hardware integrated with GitHub CI/CD, would you consume it?
Yes, and in fact, the real question is who's going to manage that, and we have one. Yeah, we have one. So Profium sponsored one employee, and we're finding one intern from LFX mentorship to also help us. And I believe other projects have the same issue, right? Who is going to handle this?
Okay. Well, since I'm not hearing any major angst, then I will keep this on the agenda for next time once we get more data. But the heads up, the proposal is likely to be to increase the 15K to be something larger. We also still have this, it may not be that big of a deal because we already have this 100K line, the line right above it, that is unallocated. This is the catch-all right now, where we have this breakdown that's 100 plus specifically things for 15, 60, and 52, and we have 100 spare left for us to accommodate new proposals if somebody. So we just pulled some out of this when we voted on the website maintenance stuff last week or last meeting, and so this 100 is now a little bit lower, but it means we still have a significant portion that is as yet unallocated, waiting for proposals. And so heads up, chances are this 15K number, the proposal will be to increase this 15K and use some of that 100K that's otherwise unallocated. So, and so we'll get more information there, but thank you, Nick, and anybody else that's a mentor on this call here. If you can check with so I think Howard, I guess there's some people on the call here as well. So, and then Eric, if you can check with Grameen and so on. So this is your action items. All right. Okay. If any other comments on that before we move on? We got one other quickie topic, and then we'll have the last half hour at least on the common terminology. So, all right. Any updates from outreach that need to be brought to our attention? I think on this one, where were we at on this one? I think somebody needs to remind me from the minutes. This is where I thought somebody was volunteering to look at this, whether it was interns or what did we talk about last time? Who remembers?
Yes. So I tried to get the interns involved with Wikipedia.
Yeah.
But since they're very new, they felt a bit intimidated to actually make changes to Wikipedia. So it didn't actually work out as expected.
Okay, so we need an alternate plan then?
Yeah, we need a different approach for that.
Okay, so for anybody that wasn't in the conversation before, this phrase right here is just wrong from our perspective. And so we said, how do we get this updated? And there is no company competing page on Wikipedia. That's a longer thing. So there's how do we fix this page? And then what do we put on another page, the two things? And this is where, at least for updating this page, the outreach committee said, we'd like the TAC to do that to make sure that it's technically correct. So simplest thing would be to just remove that phrase right there. Even better is if there's another page to refer it to have something that says what the relationship is. But that's what we're looking for, somebody to take that action item.
Yeah, from my own experience, adding and changing text on Wikipedia, it's not as straightforward as it may sound. Yeah. It's pretty much random, the reaction, and it's a little bit frustrating, to be honest. So good luck with that.
Is there anybody here who'd like to volunteer? You don't even have to be a member of the CCC to volunteer for this. So anybody on the call here that's familiar with updating Wikipedia is welcome to volunteer. So. Otherwise, I can send out a call on the TAC mailing list. But again, clearly this is wrong. It is up to us, the TAC, to make sure that our brand is not used incorrectly, right? Since we are the Confidential Committee Consortium. So it is our responsibility to fix this somehow. So let's go back. All right, if there's nothing else from outreach, then that means we're ready to go on to common terminology. And I saw Eric, you had, so there's two things we're going to follow up on. Eric had the action item to do the markdown conversion, which has been done on a pull request, and Steve had the action item to write the summary. And so I can continue sharing or hand it over to either of you guys. Who wants to report first?
Why don't I report first? Because I need to drop
Okay.
in about 5 minutes.
Okay, go ahead. You want to share or you want to?
You just go ahead and pull it up, the document itself. I didn't put it
Okay,
in
yeah.
the GitHub one, so
Right,
it's in the
because you guys
Google
were
Doc,
acting in
so,
parallel. Yeah. Okay. All right. We're going on to the end, right?
all the way at the end. There's just a couple of sentences to talk about wrapping this up. So give folks a chance to read it and comment on it.
And if you're commenting in the document itself, make sure you're suggesting, and I'll paste the link just for ease. There's the link into the document there if you want to look at it on your own screen.
I mean, ultimately, this document is about definitions and vocabulary. So that's what the last line's all about.
Yeah.
Looks good to me.
Okay.
After this change right here, it looks okay to me. And to your point, Steve, yeah, I agree. The most important statement is that very last one that motivates why there's a whole document. And I think concluding with that reads well to me. So,
okay.
I think I have a problem with this statement.
Okay.
Confidential computing is a paradigm that's enabled by a fundamental change to the CPU architecture. It is not, confidential computing is not itself a fundamental architecture change to the CPU.
I think that's fair. I mean, ultimately, the architectural changes are varied by the chip, and there's a definition that we have of what is trusted execution environments. Confidential computing is the concept.
Right. Yeah. It's the sum of the hardware and software that makes use of changes. Well, so confidential computing is a paradigm about keeping data secret from the platform operator.
I think it's, I mean, I draw the analogy to virtualization ultimately because there's memory management units that are in the CPUs. VMs is a logical construct that lives at to a certain level. What is virtualization? So I don't disagree with your changes at all. I think that's good.
Did I capture this correctly, Simon?
You may want to change addition to additions.
Yeah, you're welcome to edit yourself, but I'm also happy to just do it whatever you're proposing on the screen here to review. So
I'll go back and take a longer look, but
okay.
I thought I would just
sure
make my comment here.
But
anybody
Dave, your
else?
speech to text functionality is very good.
All right. Anybody else have comments, suggestions for additions or corrections here? All right. Steve, any other questions that you wanted to ask on this, or should we
No.
go up to other parts of it? All right. That looks great. Thank you. So all the rest, I'm just checking to see if there's any other comments or suggestions since last meeting in the text here, because that one was done after Eric snapshotted. So I'm looking to see if there's anything else in that category that somebody had done. So I don't know when, Eric, the last time that you synced with the document, to see if anybody made changes.
I did a scan earlier today. I didn't see anything pop up.
Other than Steve's, yeah. Okay. Okay, and you had a couple of action items after last time. Did you only do the changes in the pull request, or did you do any changes in the document, Eric?
I did not do any changes in the document.
Okay.
I just copied what was in the document, moved it over to the pull request, and now it's a pull request. And initially, I wasn't going to do the MD because I was waiting on Kurt to see if they actually worked with MD. Then I said, I'll just make some MD edits. So while my initial post 2 weeks ago was out without the MD edits, I've updated them to include the MD edits. So again, they're just base, and I'm just saying include, but this is what we got.
I think you had some action items from last time to update a diagram label or something somewhere. I forget the details. I don't know if it was the RAM encryption versus memory encryption.
Oh, I'm sorry. I did do that.
Something.
Yes.
Okay,
I was talking about since beyond the requests that were made in the last meeting.
Yep.
Yeah.
I have to drop off at this point. I'll check the action items later to see if I've been voluntold for any more writing.
All right. Thanks so much, Steve.
So I did not make any of the changes. I only made the changes that were discussed in the last meeting.
Okay. But any of the action items that you said, when I do the conversion, I'll do it. That's been done in the versions that we're looking at now.
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right. So would you like to highlight anything here that's a change from last meeting that was resolutions of action items? Anything you want us to look at?
Calling it memory encryption. I think that's there. The TDX is added. Sorry, memory isolation RAM encryption. Honestly, I made the changes that were requested, and that's it. I off the top of my head, since I did it right after the meeting, can't remember what else was there, but I think I captured what was requested based on the minutes I saw.
Let me just go back and quickly skim through the comments onto here to see if we can remember. Those are old comments. I'm looking for anything that's like a recent comment because I know there's that one. But I think you've already done that one a while back, right? This one.
Yeah, and what I did is I accepted a number of the comments that were
Yeah.
there. So I went through and just took care of getting rid of a lot of just accepting things we'd already accepted. So I don't really remember anything that would have been considered controversial.
There was questions about the definition of TCP and having to define that was one of them.
And I did put that in, I think. So the words TCP are now defined with a link to it in there.
Okay, let's look at that. TCP. Okay, okay, as defined by NIST. And it's expanded there, okay?
Yeah.
So that's one of the changes right there.
That's one of them, yeah.
If I don't hear any comments and stuff, I'll keep going, but pausing to highlight stuff for people. The question about whether TDX should be added into the diagram.
It is. And I added it where it was requested.
Right there,
Yeah.
and there, those two, okay. That's old. And for anything else, it says 2022. Okay, I think that takes us to the end of 2022. All right. So just to tie this back to our discussion of TEEP earlier on, TEEP was originally, OTRP was originally designed for things that are confidential library over to confidential application. So basically anything from this confidential process and confidential library, right? Because on the term trusted application is probably synonymous to what we would call confidential process right here. TA is the term that the global platform uses, and it's commonly used in the trust zone industry. Here, it's approximately synonymous with confidential process. Confidential library was also examples of use in TEEP, although in the SGX case, when your confidential library can often just be copied onto the normal file system. And so you might not need a TEEP protocol to do the confidential library portion. But once you get into confidential container and confidential VM, this is where you start to have a large VM. And now you say, well, how would I want to update one of these things inside the VM? Okay, well, I could update the entire VM image, okay? And so in some deployments, you might actually do that. In other cases, you might want to update something into a VM, say a piece of configuration, say key update without having to rev the entire VM. And if you were saying, how would I update something into there? Then you could use the TEEP protocol in some of these cases here to update the persistent storage where you have a TEEP agent inside a container or inside of a VM. You could also use it like in an NRX case where they're deploying a a thing, and I don't remember whether NARCS would call a confidential container or something else without looking at the document. NARCS was looking at saying they wanted to deploy their confidential process or container or VM using the TEAP protocol into the TE in the cloud. So I'm just trying to tie our two presentations together here. And this is the picture I was referring to back then.
So that's pretty much it. I made the changes and I posted it, and now I think we can start, if that is an acceptable thing to adopt, we can start editing from there and accept the pull request.
Okay, any objections to just accepting this pull request, given that it's supposed to just match the document and we were accepting document changes? I think we should just go ahead and merge this pull request as is, and then if people have changes, then they can file them as additional pull requests. Like, for example, this one, you might want this one to actually be a clickable link or something like that. And so, but I can do that in a separate pull request, right?
Yeah.
Let's just get a baseline. Exactly. Okay. So I'm going to mark this one as approved, but I'm just going to say an open call here. Anybody, because we had a specific process for doing GitHub merges, but this one is special because it's just transferring a Google Doc that we've been iterating on into GitHub, and we've just highlighted the differences. And so this is probably closer to how we do minutes. And so are there any objections to, because this is still a work in progress, right? Any objections to go ahead and again, merging this pull request as kind of a special case? Simon,
David,
you were involved, so in the GitHub.
I've just inlined 2 comments that you can just commit, which there's they only line the figures, which are otherwise not included in the render.
Ah, I see what you're saying. In the GitHub view, yeah.
Yeah.
Are you okay with that, Eric?
Absolutely. I
think that's a great point.
Perfect.
That's one of the 2. Sorry, gotta get the other one.
Dave, another comment I had once you're done with this, another question rather than a comment.
All right, go ahead.
If you see the bottom of the PR, there is a conclusion or summary that is still pending. So do you want to raise another GitHub issue to track that, or?
No, that's what Steve is reporting. In the document, it says it's still pending. Oh, that's right. You're right. How do we get Steve's stuff back into here? Yes, let's do that as a separate pull request. And since Eric, do you want to do that, or shall we volunteer Steve to do it?
I don't have the raw from what was earlier, so whoever has the raw can just paste it in as far as I'm concerned.
It was there in the Google Docs, so it's this paragraph right here.
So you just edited it? Yeah, I can just throw it in.
Okay, so if you want to do that, do that as a separate pull request. Yeah, but yeah, thank you for pointing that out. We appreciate you guys both, Steve and Eric, doing your work in parallel rather than waiting for the other one to finish. So these merges are easy. All right, so unless there's any objections, I'm going to go ahead and merge this one. Simon, you were involved in the creation of the GitHub process. You don't see any problems with that? Just to have another act. Simon's not listening. Okay. All right. Then I'm going to go ahead and merge this one with all of you as witnesses that we have a consensus on the call here, and it's still a work in progress. So. Okay, done. Please open GitHub pull request accordingly. So now if we go to, let's see, what is this under? This is under terminology, right? And so now if we go to common terminology here, and now do we see all the stuff in line? Yep, right there. Okay, cool. And so this means that for Kurt, yeah, so this is one of the pull requests here. I said I would probably submit one to turn this one into a link. But other than that, this is where the next step would be, besides inviting anybody, any of you out here that's listening to this to file pull requests, then the LF team can start turning this into the actual PDF form. And of course, we can still send them diffs over time. That's fine, but they can start the process because it takes them at least 2 weeks to go through their whole editing pipeline thing. So. Yogesh, yes, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't, maybe the hand is from the older.
Oh, okay.
I didn't.
All right. All right, so this is where I don't know if it's like Hannes and Ming, if you guys have a chance to review this, your feedback would be much appreciated. To say, does this make sense from another IETF perspective, all the other things that you know? I mean, obviously, Eric's been involved, and I think Hank has, reviewed it, but if you guys can do a review, you can see it's not that long, right? It's like, 3 pages, so.
Happy to do that.
Okay.
Yeah, all the time. Yeah.
And so the built out version is there. We'll just paste that link to make it easy to grab that, so. So yeah, if you guys can do a review and post the results either directly to Eric, post a pull request, post a GitHub issue, whatever you want. So
Okay.
So the PR that you just merged, it doesn't. I don't know how much we care about signed offs, but there's no signed offs on there.
I thought I mark it as approved, but I should at least add a comment on that one as to. Let's go back to it here. Pull request. Yeah, for Providence here. It's okay. You can see it's marked as approved by me.
Yeah, I'm talking about like the DCO kind of sign off there.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Eric's contribution isn't.
I know what you mean. Yeah, that's something we actually haven't ever discussed here because we haven't used DCO and stuff on other like on minutes or anything else either. So that's a good meta question. While I type this, why don't you ask the rest of the group here for just a second? Ask other people what they think. I'm just going to type.
Okay, so I'm just used to doing sign offs for everything because normally projects that I'm on have a DCO, developer certificate of origin, and that just keeps clear license. This isn't code exactly. We've got a CC by 4.0 attribution in the beginning of this, here at the root of the repo. So I guess I don't know off the top of my head if signed off equates equally for the Creative Commons as it does for code licenses.
Anybody else have comments on Dan's question? I don't think, I don't have permissions to look at the security settings. I don't think, maybe they added, let's see. This is if we did that, then it's require signed commits is what we're talking about, is this line right here, right? If we do this, then it would require signed commits, where right now this is not part of the thing. So
that actually might be something different.
Isn't that what you were asking about? Is well,
there's the signed off by, and then there is like a public key signed commit.
So these say verified here. So I wonder if Eric was using them. Right, where it says verified right here. So at least Eric's are actually signed.
Cool.
Right,
yeah, so not a lawyer,
ones, if we look at,
I am acknowledging the licensing of this project in my contribution is different than I am authentically Eric Voigt as attested by GitHub. So you're right, though, we don't seem to have a DCO here, so maybe that's a broader discussion that's just going to crater what we're doing here.
I think given that we're the Confidential Computing Consortium, I hadn't thought about it before, but yeah, we probably should institute a DCO just for additional levels of provenance on text and things. So seems like it would be in line with us saying, hey, we're all about security if we start using more security mechanisms. So
maybe a question to LF for Kurt, if there's a standard DCO for the Creative Commons that we could include here.
Okay, TAC meeting discussion. 5th of May, 2022. Trying to write that in a format that's neither European nor American centric. Not require signing. Should we have a DCO process for the governance? So does LF have a recommended one already? Does that capture the question, or are there other questions you want to add to that, Dan?
Just maybe change signing to signed off by.
Where, here?
Yeah.
Like that?
Thank you.
Okay. All right, we'll track that one. Good question. All right, any other comments? All right, then I'll just take us back to here to wrap up. So upcoming meetings. So that was last meeting and this meeting, which means I think our queue of confirmed ones is empty, although I think that we were trying to put here for the tech talk was I think it was Mike and yeah, this one, logging and error reporting and confidence computing, Mark Purcell. I'd have to check with Kurt because we did ask him and I think he had confirmed on the 19th, but it looks like this slide wasn't updated. So I'm pretty sure that this is Mike's topic here as our tech talk next time, and that Mike Purcell will be here next time. So welcome to come back then, but we are looking for additional topics that would be of interest to the TAC now that we've used this one and scheduled this one. We've been draining our queue of ideas. So
I confirm with Mike.
You'll confirm with Mike? Okay, great, thanks. Nick
Yeah.
to confirm with Mike. I think we'd already confirmed with email, but I
Okay.
think that was like last week. So Nick to confirm
Okay,
with Mike,
thanks.
but I'm pretty sure he already confirmed, but looks like we just didn't update the slide at the time. But this is a call for any other topics that we think would be of interest to this community. It could be presentations from one of us. It could be, gosh, we should really, invite so-and-so. And so we've had a bunch of, let's see, where's our past list? Here's an example of past list. Any other topics that people can think of off the top of their head that they think would be great? And I guess there's actually been one more that wasn't on here, which was Mark's, the governance one was also should be added to this list because I think that one was after, it was in between here and the top of the other one. Okay, I'll ask the same thing on the mailing list, but if people have other areas, whether they're another organization, whether they're another topic that people want to talk about, or things that you just like to know about that somebody else, that you say, I would love for somebody else to come and educate us about some topic that I don't know about. So think about that. If there's no suggestions, then that will take us to the end of the call. Are there any other topics that we haven't got to that people wanted to cover today? Otherwise, thank you for coming, and thank you, Hannes and Ming, for sticking around and agreeing to review the white paper, since we wanted to be as broadly applicable as possible. So,
sure, thank you.
All right, then thanks everybody.
Thanks everyone.
We'll
Thank
go ahead and close the call
Thank
now.
you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.